And we are live. It's another great day in Cribl TV with the usual suspects, Ed Bailey and Jackie McGuire. Jackie, how you doing today?
Not too bad. Sneezing my head off because it's effectively spring in Arizona, but other than that, I'm good.
There you go. Hey, so I heard you got a big project going on in your backyard. How's that going?
Yeah, so my backyard for my house is only 3 years old, and they didn't finish the backyard when they built it, and I'm renting, so we didn't want to pay to finish the backyard, but we finally convinced the owner. So yeah, I've got a big patio and all kinds of beautiful river stone going in, so I'll actually be able to hang out back there. It won't just look like a desert barren,
There you
like
go.
it's just this like barren desert landscape right now with these pea-sized thorn balls in it.
Oh, you gotta love it. Hey, but springtime, that's gonna be really nice.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Absolutely. Yep. It's a nice day in Atlanta. The weather's nice and clear. It's cool. You can't beat it. So today, what are we going to talk about?
We're going to talk about delivering value in your organization without budgets increases, because we've heard from quite a few customers and partners this year that it's looking like it's going to be a fairly flat budget year. So we figured we'd talk about some other ways you can deliver value other than just spending money.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good idea. It's really hard for leaders because you get asked to, I mean, all the way down to line managers, unit managers, directors. You're asked, hey, here's our organizational goals, and this is what we're going to do. And you're thinking to yourself, whoa, how am I going to get this done? I mean, it's not easy. I think the fundamental thing that goes on is too much time is spent keeping the lights on. I've seen studies somewhere between 70 and 80% of all the resources are just to simply exist and stay where you are. And in today's environment, you've got to build transformation and innovation into what you're doing. And I think boards are just grown tired of, hey, give us $200 million and we'll transform the business, because it rarely works out. So I think this is a great discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. All
Well,
right.
let's bring up lovely slides.
Yeah. So let's see. Everybody already knows us, but we'll introduce ourselves anyway. So I'm Jackie McGuire. I am the senior security strategist and senior market strategy manager for security at Cribl. Basically means that I do a lot of talking, writing, meming, social media posting about security. My
Don't
background
forget
is
coffee
data.
drinking.
Oh yeah, I drink an ungodly amount of coffee. And my background is in data science. So I was a data scientist for SIM and then an industry analyst for S&P. And I'm also a recovered registered investment advisor and financial advisor. Spent 15 years in finance. So that's me. Ed, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm let's see, yeah, I always want to say like principal talking head, but so the actual is the principal technical evangelist. So I was one of Cribl's first customers way back in the day, and my background is in hardcore systems administration and systems of analysis, platform administration, SIM administration, and then I ran teams to manage all that data, get things done. So for me, it's all about the nuts and bolts of execution and work, and my, my feet are on the ground doing work. And so those are my people.
Yeah, it is my go-to anytime I want to ask how we would practically apply something that we have a theory about. So, all right, I'm going to dive into
Here to
it.
help.
So 2024 is an interesting year, right? Depending on the report you read, whether it's Gardner, IDC, I saw the CrowdStrike one. IT and security budgets are not flat per se, I guess, but they're growing at 8 to 9%, which sounds like a decent amount. It's more than inflation. But here's that put into context. So while your budgets may
Exactly.
be growing or 8 or 9%, data is actually growing compounded annually at about 28%. And so this is really leaving teams in quite a bind because they're being asked to do a whole lot more with every additional dollar that they're being given. And
Well, one thing I
so,
wanted to mention
yeah,
also is I think some of that growth is fairly uneven. Seeing companies spend more on security, but not as much on ops, more on cloud transformation, not as much on their on-prem environment. And so it's very easy, if you're can be doing systems automation and have zero new budget.
yeah, and it's interesting because you know just as well as I do that sometimes in security there's also these like trendy the trendy spend, where
Yes, I
like last year, if it was XDR, you could get money for anything, right? This year it's going to be AI and generative AI. So there's also what a given management executive team wants to spend money on can also kind of fluctuate depending on which way the wind's blowing. So that's another thing I think is probably important to keep in mind. But here's the important thing: the impact of budgets on your performance expectations at your company, there's a disconnect, right? Because even if you don't get additional budget or your budget is cut, you're still expected to do more as an individual, or if you're a manager, as a team, a department.
right.
So this is really kind of a crappy place to be in, because if I can't demonstrate that I, as an individual contributor or a manager or director, delivered value even without additional resources, I'm probably still going to feel that pain come performance review time, right?
Very much so. I mean, expectations are a massive issue, even more so when you don't have when you're not sure if you have the budget. So let's talk about the value, and what are some tips to try to help a manager, help a leader get this done?
Yeah, so I think one of the great things here is that IT and security teams really impact virtually all business value, right? So there's a number of different things that drive business value. So to take a step back into my economics and finance career, there's a handful of different key areas of business value. The first is financial value. That's probably the most obvious. There's operational value, reputational value, and then strategic value. We're going to go into each of these and how our teams and impact them. But really, the important thing to note here is that because almost every aspect of business is now powered by technology, technology teams touch almost every aspect of value that a business creates. So I want to highlight that first. So I'm going to jump into the first one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over kind of high level what each of these things mean, and then how Cribl helps deliver value in this area. And then Ed, I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to have you talk about your practical experience, because you have more
Sure.
boots on the ground experience in security teams than I do. So I'm going to have you explain how you would go about leveraging value in these different areas. So first one is financial value. And I'm a big fan of threes. So everything here is going to be threes. So if you're somebody who likes to know what's going to happen beforehand, everything is going to be threes. I think there's one slide in here that has 2 bullets instead of 3. So financial value is what you think of when you think of value a lot, right? So it's things like preventing losses, enhancing operational efficiency, and the third one, reducing insurance premiums. So this is a place where IT and security teams really, it's pretty obvious where the impact is here, because you're directly impacting the actual dollars and cents going in and out of your organization. And reducing insurance premiums might not be an obvious one for IT and security teams, but the thing is that your cyber risk insurance and your catastrophic cyber technology insurance is getting a lot more expensive. And this is actually a place where you can have some pretty meaningful impact with the work that you do. So here's some of the ways that Cribl helps to deliver financial value. So Cribl, one of the biggest reasons that people love us is that we really help you leverage more value from your spend on existing tools. So sometimes we deal with a misconception in the market that Cribl reduces the amount of money you spend on different SaaS platforms. And while that can theoretically be the case, it typically isn't, because what we find is that most teams are maxing out their license on any given platform that they're using, analytics platform. And so really what we end up doing is help them not spend less, but do more with what they're currently spending. So it's kind of like if you were trying to keep on the same amount of calories in your diet, but just eat a healthier mix of food. Cribl helps you do that with your data sources, right? And then another big one is optimizing storage based on use case. So some of the existing ways of getting data in and analyzing it and then storing it don't give you a lot of options in terms of the cost of the storage that you're using, and it doesn't really allow you to pair up the proper type of storage with data based on the amount of access you need to that data, how readily available you need it to be, how you need to be able to search it. And then another big one is eliminating vendor lock-in. And this is actually interestingly, one of the bigger drivers of purchasing Cribl licenses is being able to have the flexibility to not be dependent on a single vendor. And I think that becomes exceptionally important in periods of consolidation. We just did another very similar webinar talking about that. Yeah, and like, can you so do me a favor? I guess we'll start. Let's back up a little bit. So let's talk. Oh, I'm cheating. Let's talk about insurance premiums. So a lot of times your cyber risk insurance premiums are based on the level of visibility and data that you are able to collect and provide your insurer. So how do you think about that as a security leader? How do you think about kind of collecting the right kind of data and being able to share that data to reduce the amount that you're spending there?
Sure, and I think that's a great way to look at it. The cyber premiums are going up, and you're finally seeing insurance companies that are starting to audit companies just like they would audit a company for, is your building safe? Are we going to provide you insurance on your property and liability? And so they're starting to adopt frameworks. And so it behooves you to adopt the frameworks that your insurance carrier is adopting. So you can show that, yes, for this and this framework, I'm collecting these logs so that I'm going to have that minimal standard, if not better than what your insurance carrier is looking like. I mean, just like, for example, for your homeowner's insurance, you get advantages to say, hey, I have a fire alarm, I have a security alarm, I have this, and you get reductions in your premium. And that's why I think as a leader, it benefits you in a couple of ways. Adopting those frameworks is going to lower your insurance costs, and it's also going to help you complete your audits faster as well. Increasingly, audits are a tremendous waste. Well, I'll say be careful about waste, but it takes a tremendous amount of time. And so, by being prepped, being ready is going to lower your cost on the premiums. It's going to lower your audit costs. It's also going to have the virtue of improving your security posture as well through better consistency. And having something like Cribl makes it so much easier to collect the right data, collect the right data, get that data to your sim tools. And to go back to that real world example, I've had many audits, and it was so useful. I could open up Cribl, and I could show the map of, here's where the data is coming from, here's where we're doing it, here's where it's going, and here's also how we monitor it. Here's also how we maintain retention. And having that map all in one place helps answer a lot of questions, and it starts to generate credibility with your auditors that you know what you're doing, because it's value that just keeps on going.
Yeah, I think this becomes really important if you do have a cybersecurity incident. A lot of times, insurers use attestations, so it's essentially you just signing something saying, I say that I'm saying this." I certify that I'm saying that I'm using an endpoint detection. I certify that, and so having the data to back up what you've attested to is incredibly important because insurers are in the business of not paying. So
Yes.
the first thing they're going to do when you have a claim is go look at all the different attestations you signed and the check boxes you checked. And if they find a single one where you checked a box or signed something saying you were doing something and they can prove that you were not, your chances of having losses covered go down dramatically. So
Yeah. It's a
just
big deal.
like just like Uber drivers started using dash cams when they drive because documenting every single thing that happens becomes incredibly important. It's the same thing in your enterprise. So the ability to utilize, when we talk about optimizing storage. So for example, the ability to collect flow data, full fidelity logs, things like that, and super low cost object storage where you have it if you really need it to be able to actually look at full session captures. That's incredibly important, and where we didn't always have the flexibility before to be able to store those things in the best place to be able to afford to do that. That's one of the things that Cribl gives you the ability to do.
Oh, can I add one more thing I think about
Yeah.
financial value? And this is something I can't stress enough for leaders. It's so important to know your numbers. It's important to understand, what do my tools cost? What's my value? What's my ROI if I don't have these tools? Another big one, especially Jackie, you've already mentioned this, is you're not only Cribl tools not only give you the ability to lower the amount of data, but also give you the ability to make your tools even better. So it's critically important to understand these factors. And then the next thing is understand growth, because Jackie was mentioning we rarely see reductions in costs. What we really see more often than not is we stop spending more money. Like, for example, my costs were going 35% yearly. Once I brought Cribl in, our costs went down 5, 6, 7%. And that's the kind of thing, that's going to get leaders impressed, because they expect a rate of growth, but the uncontrolled rate of growth is the real problem. And so just know your numbers and understand your elevator pitch. Have your slides always ready, because you're going to get asked about this a lot.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, again, we touch every single part of an organization.
Exactly.
And a lot of times there's like hey, we want this thing for shipping and receiving. Well, guess what? That thing runs on an API. That API has to be monitored. That monitoring takes data. That data needs to be looked at by somebody. So yeah,
Yep.
it's we're going to get into quantifying your value later, but I think that's a great point to bring it up early, is that benchmarking and understanding. The other thing is quantifying risk. So what are the risks that you're actually avoiding, and what's the average cost of one of those compromises or breaches, because that's also important. Let's go to operational value. Here's another big one. And by the way, this goat makes me so incredibly happy. It's like a fax goat, I think. I don't know.
There we
I
go.
don't know what it is.
Right.
So operational value is things like protecting critical data and infrastructure, maintaining system integrity and availability, and improving compliance and risk management. And so these are really the things that help your business to operate day to day and keep disruptions from happening. So I think to dive into some specifics is probably the easiest way to start tackling this. So when Cribl thinks about operational data, we think about things like enabling the collection of noisy and problematic data. So from an operational perspective, you kind of have this catch-22 where you want to be able to see absolutely everything that's going on, but most of the data is going to be completely worthless until something happens. And so it can be really hard to anticipate the value of noisy data. So when we talk about noisy, we're talking about APIs is a good example. I was talking about monitor APIs, but also things like DNS, network flows, VPC logs, like all these things that, like, if there's a problem, they become critically important and extremely high value, but otherwise they're just kind of a pain in the ass to deal with, to be quite frank. The next one that's really important is improving system visibility and observability. So this is really important, right? And so I think what happened is, through the 90s and 2000s and 2010s, Jesus, 2020s already, we had this kind of venture capital and private equity fueled wave of siloed innovation, right? Everybody wanted defensible intellectual property. So the whole point was to make something that didn't work with anything else because it was so unique. And that created this kind of crazy hodgepodge mosaic of different tools, and we can't really see any of them or what's going on or how they're talking to each other. So that's another thing that Cribl really helps with, is helping you really see how your tools are talking to each other and what's going on. And then number 3, because I like threes, de-risking vendor and platform changes and migrations. And I think this one is a big one. And it's one of the things that drives the purchase of Cribl pretty frequently, is actually moving from one analytics platform to another, even changing SIMs, changing observability platforms, because we can really help you de-risk that process by decoupling the way you're collecting your data from the way you're analyzing it, so you're not overly dependent on your vendor for that process, or by enabling you to create a kind of structured plan for migrating data out of one vendor into independent storage or another vendor, which also will help you to not be subject to the whims of any given vendor. So, Ed, do you want to provide some real world color on things that you've dealt with from an operational perspective?
Right. And these are all big deals. And this is also, as a leader, you have to paint the picture. And this is about setting perception with your leaders of why this matters. Let's start with noisy, problematic data. Nothing slows down resolution for operations and security like crappy data or bad data or too much data. And so this is where, when you start these programs, you can start working on your mean time to resolution or mean time to case closure. And this is why you want to be working with your tier 1, your NOC leaders, your SOC leaders, to keep track of this, because you want in on that success. Because at the end of the day, that's what your IT and security leaders care about. They care that that we've done the monitoring, that we trigger the alert, and that we close the case quickly. And that's what they want to see, is they want to see a decline. And, they want to see things faster and better over time. And so that also helps you illustrate value. Visibility and observability is another one because especially as everything is online today, it's so important to understand, is my site performing? Is my site performing well? What are my individual user experiences? Because that is, again, there's so much there's so much competition out there that if your site is or your app is taking too long, people are just going to move on. And so again, that goes back to that strategic business value. And this is the kind of things you want to talk to your leaders about. Don't talk to your leaders about, hey, we improved our API performance, from 6 milliseconds to 3 milliseconds. Tell them why it matters about the business, because that's what's going to get their attention. And
Yeah.
finally, platform migrations are a nightmare. This typically, so say we're going to migrate from one SIM to another, you're talking about spending a year. So I have a current SIM, I'm going to go buy a new SIM. I'm going to get a 3-year contract. You're typically expecting to burn the first year of your contract for the new SIM on the migration. And then your most SIM platforms, you're going to be starting at 7 figures a year. And the faster you can make that migration is more money that you're getting more money and more value you're getting back to your organization. And then and also the risk cannot be underestimated in terms of value. I had a CISO talk to me and say, we hate our SIM, but the risk of our compromising our posture, the time, the distractions has prevented us from doing something about it. So now we have the ability with Cribl, I can send my data to my old SIM without interrupting the posture. I can send the same data to my new SIM. We can migrate our content. We can do an A/B comparison. We can do testing so that before we go live, we know for a fact that our new SIM is as good or better than our old SIM. And it gives me a level of comfort that I can do this. I'm not compromising the business. Because at the end of the day, it's security posture. No one cares about what SIM you're using or if it's hard to use, as long as the security posture is solid. And so if you can maintain posture and move, it's a win-win all the way around.
Yeah, and I assume most of our listeners have managed a SIM or analytics migration before, but without Cribl, previously what you had to do is get sample data. Typically, it was really hard to use live data in 2 different platforms at once
Or
without
you have
Cribl.
dev or something. Like you just put
Yeah,
your dev data, and typically your dev data doesn't reflect your prod data. So it's
yeah,
very hard to test your detections in your content.
yeah, and so you really just you're on a hope and a prayer that the sample data you're putting through or the dev data, you're comparing those alerts to the ones you think you should have gotten. And it's just, there's always a risk, whereas with Cribl, where you literally can copy completely identical streams of data, put them into both SIM at the same time and say, okay, the alert from this SIM is showing up in this SIM as well, and actually verify that the input and output matches without hoping that your sample data is representative of live data. So I can't over I don't think you could overstate that value. All
The
right.
the one CISO I was mentioning kept their old SIM going for 30 days after they cut over because they wanted to see, are we missing something? And, do we
Yep.
have the ability to fail back just in case we had a problem? And then
Yeah.
once 30 days in, they hit a button in Cribble Stream, turned off the feed, and they were done.
Yeah.
And it's just so it was 1.1 million a year for them. They were able to go from projected 12-month migration, they got it done in 6. And so that is, about 600 grand back to the business in terms of value. And they were able to do without any risk. So, but those are the things that at the end of the day, it's what people care about. That's what you got to set with your leaders.
Yep. And cost avoided is just as good as revenue made. And that's something that I think, is I don't know.
Mhm.
I think as you move up in the food chain in an enterprise, you do get a little bit more business savvy, but not coming from a business or strategic background. If you are from an IT and security world, it's not always obvious to you that costs avoided are just as good as revenue earned. So you have to keep track of all of this. I think to your point with understanding site, well, we're going to talk about reputational value right now. And this is a place where some of the numbers can be theoretical, but that makes it even more important to track. So like when we were talking about reputational value, we were talking about things like brand trust and customer confidence, preventing negative publicity and media scrutiny, and enhancing your competitive advantage over your competitors. And so we've seen, 23andMe is probably one of the most recent, like, will anybody give their data to 23andMe again ever? I mean, it's
No.
the impact to a brand of a cybersecurity incident cannot be overstated, especially if it's a brand that is dealing with personal data, health data. Um, so this is where it gets a little bit difficult, but really important to quantify costs avoided or risks avoided. So places that Cribl helps with protects reputational data, decreasing the probability of sensitive data leaks. So because Cribl gives you significantly better ways to track how data is created, ingested, routed, shared, we really do reduce the probability that you're going to accidentally have sensitive data somewhere you don't intend to, or share it with somebody that you don't intend to. So that's critical. To your point, you were talking about this under operational risks. I put it under reputational because I think the ability to your minimum time to investigate and resolve potential compromises goes a great has a lot to do with your brand value and your reputational value. And then maintaining compliance with laws and regulations. Boy, do we have a lot of those coming down the pike. And I
Oh
think
yeah.
ensuring that your department is not the reason that your company is on the SEC's naughty list is probably pretty important. But for things like this, do you know what the average revenue that your company's website does every day? For example, if you're in a retail operation, so you ought to know the revenue numbers for the other departments at your company, because as IT and security are enabling all of these other things at the company to happen flawlessly, to be able to quantify, like, we avoided, had this not happened, the website would have been down for 2 to 3 days at an estimated cost of, $5 to $10 million in revenue a day, something like that. Like, those are the kind of numbers that IT and security leaders really should be keeping track of, because when it comes time to talk about what your groups do, those are the things that really being able to quantify goes a long way towards demonstrating the actual value that your team is
Yeah,
bringing.
absolutely. And those are, again, those it's important to know your numbers, know what your website's doing, know what your lines of revenue are, know what your risk and exposure is. And also when you talk about, so if you have business in the EU, privacy laws are a big deal. Talk about reputational damage, because if you're talking reputational and extraordinary financial penalties. If you're working in regulated industry, so another, always understand, as a healthcare company and we violate HIPAA, we risk loss of Medicare and Medicaid funding. And those are the things you talk about. And just in order to help your business leaders measure the risk, understand what they're doing, understand why this is important, so that now you can make hopefully rational business decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And then last but not least, strategic value. And this is one where I think this is, as you level up as a leader in business, this is really one of the places where you can start to quantify some of the more kind of fuzzy edge case things that you do. Supporting business expansion and innovation. I'm going to talk about this in the next slide with some practical examples. But this is really something that comes down to IT and security to enable. We're reliant on technology for everything we do in business, and without your team's support, none of the other parts of your business are going to be innovating or expanding in any way without technology support. Contributing to business resilience. This is just the exact thing that Ed and I were just talking about, with understanding what's the average daily revenue that your business is doing in different areas of the business, so that you can really understand how just you keeping the lights on and the doors open is contributing to the bottom line. And then enabling informed decision making. And so I think this one is really important. And just like we just talked about a few minutes ago with, sometimes executive teams get distracted or hyper focused on one thing or another because they see it in the news, or they see it on Reddit or Twitter or wherever, and they decide it's the thing that you should be focused on right now. Really doing a better job with strategic value can help you make better decisions and push back on some of those directions the wind is blowing. And this is the one slide that I only have 2 bullets on, so
There you go.
it's killing my autism that we're out of pattern here, but it's okay. So here's where I think Cribl can really help you step your game up as a leader. The strategic collecting, onboarding, storage, and deployment of new technology and data sources. And what we mean by this is decoupling the way you're collecting your data from the way you're analyzing it, from the way you're storing it. Because we've had these kind of siloed solutions like we talked about with all this intellectual property, these technologies that don't talk to each other, a lot of times we have this kind of single thread architecture where we have one thing doing collection that's sending to one tool that's analyzing, that has its own storage that it's sending to. As a leader, you can really start to talk about the actual strategic theory of how you are collecting, analyzing, and storing data, and really help shape the way your other executives think about data in general. And this is a really important thing that Cribl helps you to do, because when you decouple the way you're collecting the data from the way you're analyzing it, you can do some of the things we were talking about, like sending the right data to the right places, keeping full fidelity copies of crazy noisy data that you probably don't actually need unless something goes wrong. But if something goes wrong, you have only paid a small amount to hold on to it for that time period. And then this is also somewhere where Cribl has a tool called Search, which is, as you might imagine, a tool for searching. It's a federated search tool that really gives you unparalleled capability to access your data where it's at, in the format you need, with the schema you need, and send it where you need to. And this, again, this is a way that you can help to fundamentally change the way your other managers and executives think about data architecture, collection, and management, and really start to drive a different type of strategic thinking across your organization. So while you might not have additional budget, if you can, for example, upgrade your data architecture so that you are ready. And this is where I'm going to go off on a little tiny tangent, but everybody talks about AI and how AI is going to enable the enterprise and blah, 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 blah. Guess what? Virtually no enterprise today is architected in a way that will actually enable them to use generative AI in a way that won't cause their enterprise to spin out of control from a cost perspective and then eventually have the model collapse. And that's because we don't do a great job right now of segregating, this is this kind of data that was created here and should be stored here, and this kind of data. And if you can't segregate generated data from training data, you end up with what's called model collapse. So as a security and IT leader, while data science and large language models and generative AI may not be your core responsibility, you will be the actual infrastructure and backbone enabling those things. So this is where you can really step up and show some thought leadership around, okay, if we are going to be an AI-enabled enterprise at some point, here are some changes we can make today that don't actually cost anything, but will get us prepared for that down the road. And that is something that I think can be incredibly impactful come performance review time.
Very much so, and that's why understanding what's strategic to your organization can be very particular to each organization, but it's vital, and also it's a great way to also get attention from your leaders, is to model your planning on what's strategic. And so, for example, if you have an organization that says we need to transform legacy to cloud, then that is what you want to build your plans around, because that's the strategic goal. So let's talk about how we can migrate our tools from on-prem to cloud. With Cribl, you can feed both. You can have a smooth migration, do it for less time, and now you can say, this is how I'm supporting the CIO's strategic goals, and you could be one of the few people who's going to understand that. So many engineers live in the tactical, and it's important that if you want to become architect, principal architect, staff, is to understand what's strategic and then structure your planning to support that.
Absolutely. Moving through maturity as a leader in IT and security is about going from fragmented and siloed to unified and and tied together. And I think this is a great way to start moving in that
It,
direction.
Bringing
Oh,
out
go ahead.
value in that data is so important too. Understanding that the cost is what generating the data is the cost. The value is in analyzing it, and
Yeah.
that's that next step that so many don't seem to get.
Yes, and I think it's interesting because data science and AI is enabling us to gain value out of to gain certain types of value out of certain types of data that you would never have anticipated that you could get before, right? And I think we really started to do this with user experience, over the last 30 years as we've built websites out. We can look at, oh, users hover over this thing, but they click on this thing. You can get that kind of insight from your appliances, from your, SaaS applications, and things like that. And so we're really kind of in this really weird, unprecedented environment where your firewall data may very well be useful to your marketing team for God knows what reason, but it's entirely possible. And it could be that there's a port there that it's really just hitting different on the way. You never know what it's going to be, but our ability to drive insight in weird places is definitely increasing.
Yeah,
Um,
just to give you an example, this is something I did with a past life where we're able to take data off of these odd appliances that you never thought, and we were able to drive marketing insights. We were able to understand, did an ad campaign, is it working, and do it hour to hour, because otherwise the plan was end of day, end of week reporting. So because we had access to the data now, we were able to get more value, and that's just one example of how ops and IT data has value across the organization, but you have to have people who understand what that value is, who are capable of talking to marketing, to sales, to other parts of the organization, and then figuring out how to get that value. And that's that next level skill.
Yeah, absolutely. And then
Mhm.
this is what goes along with it. It's one of the things that we were talking about. So I struggled for a while when I became, a higher level professional in my career with being a quote unquote self promoter because isn't I see that's generally something that's kind of discouraged and talked negatively about. But the thing is that part of your job as a leader is being a self promoter, a team promoter, a department promoter, a company promoter. And really, if you want your leadership to recognize the value that not just you as a leader, but also your team is bringing, you have to quantify it. And so this looks like a few different things. Establishing benchmarks is really important. It's there are some frameworks and maturity models and things like that, but unfortunately, um, every tech stack is as unique as the humans who are running it. And so, unfortunately, there's not really a great here's what your organization should look like. So a lot of times these benchmarks need to be established internally, and it's something that you need to do yourself. Um, Based on, again, to your point, Ed, your executive team's strategic initiatives for the business, as well as current conditions, any type of regulatory or compliance winds that are blowing one way or another. So you really need to start establishing now, like, where are we at and what is our goal? And this is, most people never get here, which is, and again, to your point, a lot of times you spend 70, 80% of your time doing the fragmented reactive crap. And so this is your first goal, is get to a place where instead of just being reactive, you actually understand where you're at and have some semblance of an idea of whether this year was better than last year or not, other than just, was there a data breach this year or was there one last year, right? And then the next step is create goals. So once you understand where you're at, where do you want to be? What are your goals? And I mean, no breaches is not realistic, right? Like almost every organization will have a breach at some point. It's inevitable, and our supply chains have become so massive and interconnected that even if you don't have a breach, one of your vendors probably will. But what are your goals in terms of time to respond? What are your goals in terms of educating your employees? There are some people aspects to IT and security that, education and creating a culture of security and compliance is just as important as making sure that you're patching vulnerabilities, right? And then last but not least, track your progress, right? So know where you're at, know where you want to be, and then track your progress towards that goal so that you actually have something to show for the work you're doing. And, in any technical job, this has always been the weird, this is what was really weird for me when I moved from finance into technical, is that the hardest part about a technical job is not doing the job, it's showing what you did and why it matters and why people should give a shit, right?
It really is, and this, I think this goes back to, so many technical leaders don't have any formal leadership training. where you're reporting up into people with MBAs or people who have been into leadership. And these are the three fundamental things they expect. And it really doesn't matter what you or your team did if you can't rationally communicate that to somebody. And then this is just the table stakes.
Yeah.
So I was lucky to have some very good mentors who educated me on the facts of life. But this is something that I hope that we can help other leaders understand what to do, because and also you have to communicate your progress, but this is also how you get projects funded, because the IT leader is going to say, well, why do I care about your project? Here's my strategic goals. If it doesn't align with my strategic goals, I don't care. I'm not going to fund it. It doesn't care how good the project is. So these are critical three things to always keep in mind.
Yeah. And that's a good point, is what I should have put as a fourth bullet point here is circle back with the people who helped you get your shit funded and thank them. Because that's another, I think, to your point, if you want people to keep giving you money to do things with, you need to show them that the money that they've given you has been used well, and come back to them and demonstrate that you're appreciative. Otherwise, and that I've seen people fail at that as well, and that they get a project funded and the project actually goes really well, but if you forget to circle back with the people who made it happen and explain why it went well, what the next steps would be, how you would improve upon it in the next iteration, that can leave a bad taste in people's mouths as well. So there are some politics involved in this, and some of it is just, different people have different priorities and different goals. And so, some of what I think we interpret as politics is just understanding that you have to deliver a different message to different people in different ways to make sure that they all understand how your work impacts them.
Yeah, it's human relationships. I'd argue human relationships are much harder than machines. But this is the thing, is that when you're working in large organizations, this is what you have to know how to do to be successful.
Yeah, people tend to get really mad if you try to turn your coworkers off and back on again.
There you go.
In any way, shape, or form. But
There you
yeah,
go.
I think that's really all I had, other than saying thank you.
I would say it's all you had. This is awesome stuff. I mean, this is the things that I hope we can help leaders with, some approaches to how do you show value? How do you move the ball forward even on a flat budget? You definitely can, but it takes some next level thinking, some maturity. And so I hope we can help you with, if you have it. So if, for anyone out there listening, you have questions, more than happy to engage on social media, engage here. Please ask all the questions you can. We'll even invite you on the live stream. You can talk to us directly, because we want to hear what you have to say. Questions, something we're missing, something we can help with.
Absolutely. We're very active on social media, and our community is full of several thousand of some of the smartest people I've met. So I would highly encourage you to join us there for some awesome security memes.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Jackie, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Great slides. Always love the goats. So everyone have a great day. Appreciate it. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody.